Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Mark Magley, director of the museum, and this is the second in a series of lectures that was recently newly funded. Thank you. You can hear me though, right? I never use a mic in this room. This was recently funded by Curtis Atkisson, who is a longtime benefactor of our museum, as a lecture series that will continue over 5 years. So we're looking very much forward to future talks. As I said, this is the second in the series, but because Curtis wasn't here for the first talk, I wanted to just give you a little bit of biography about him, because you'll be able to meet him after the talk tonight. Curtis was born and raised in Michigan. He attended Stanford University, where he met and married Marianne Vaughn. They had 6 children and 14 grandchildren. All of Curtis's 6 kids at one point or another attended BYU. And Anne died a few years ago in 2010, and Marianne died a few years ago in 2010, and he has since married Anne Benson Atkisson. So we're really glad to have her here tonight with us too. We have Curtis has lived in 13 different cities between the United States and Argentina. He served a mission to Northern California. He's a seasoned traveler, and he has supported over his career at least 4 different art museums: the Muskingum Museum of Art, the Springville Museum of Art, the Church History Museum, where both he and Anne together have almost 50 years of history as docents there, and the BYU Museum of Art. And many of the, if you go up to one of the galleries in the permanent hang, you can't turn around without bumping into a Curtis Atkisson gift in that gallery. There's so many works, and he has been particularly committed to us with contemporary art, and contemporary art will be the focus of this series. And so we are grateful to have him here, and I'd like to acknowledge him. Our speaker tonight is Alexandre Colliex. He comes to us with 3 degrees from the Sorbonne in art history and in English. He began his career as a cultural attaché at the French Embassy in Canada. He has worked as the head of the international department within the Loire Valley regional government. He has, in 2008, he started a 6-year participation as a senior advisor to the Georges Pompidou Center's director and CEO of Traveling Exhibition. That's at the Center Georges Pompidou, a fantastic icon of contemporary art throughout the world. And he has, since that time, in the last few years, been the director of development at the Foundation Jacques Guillaumetti in Paris, and he develops their global strategy for international exhibitions that have gone or are going to Milan, Istanbul, Madrid, Shanghai, London, the US, and the Middle East, all representing Jacques Guillaumetti. It's a fabulous show, and I know he's going to show you a little bit of that. Also, for the last 2 years, he has worked at CTF Art Museum Project in Hong Kong as the project director for the first contemporary art museum in Hong Kong, privately funded, and at almost exactly the same size per square feet as this museum. So imagine him building that on Hong Kong real estate. It's a fantastic thing. One thing that we like to acknowledge at BYU here is that our speaker, Alexandre, is the father of 2 children. He is married. The children are 8 and 4. And the title of his talk, very cleverly, is Museum Madness: How a 19th Century Invention is Wooing Global Millennials. And so we welcome him here tonight.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll take this mic. Okay. Well, thank you so much. Did you just get my speech?
Yes. Oh. Can I keep a copy? No, there you go.
That was clever, but thank you so much, Mark.
A few more pages. The very last. Okay, there you go.
Thank you so much, Mark. I mean, I'll give it to you. I can sign it to you afterwards, right? Thank you. I want to obviously thank Mark Magleby for having me tonight. And it is a very kind invitation to talk to you all tonight about museums, global museums. So much is happening. I also, I've just met you, Curtis and Anne, prior to this speech, and this is something that you've made possible, and I really want to acknowledge your generosity tonight. Thank you so much. And obviously Janet Christensen, who is front row here, has been instrumental in pulling strings and is such a big supporter of BYU, and I'm very honored to be at BYU tonight. So what you have here as a first image is really an image from Hong Kong, from this contemporary art museum in Hong Kong. It was a project that I've been leading for 2 years in Hong Kong, and I'll be obviously coming back to this great project towards the during my presentation. I wanted to, you very briefly hinted at a few of my moments in my career, just so you know who is talking to you tonight. Spent years, as you said, at Giacometti and the Pompidou. The Pompidou is obviously an important modern and contemporary museum. I was in charge of traveling exhibitions and international projects at the Pompidou. This was the collection of the women artists from the collection that we traveled to Brazil. It was the most successful show that year in Brazil. Worked with some of your colleagues in Nashville, around Europe. Just giving you a sense of, those are the Giacometti is such a, it's turned into a brand really, but it was the first time we brought him to Africa in a show in Rabat this year, in Doha, Qatar, and I'll get back to Qatar. This is one of those incredible places where so much is happening today for museums. You hinted at some of those exhibitions. This was in Milan, the reopening of the modern, the Galleria d'Arte Moderna, where we brought Giacometti. The title of this presentation, I just wanted to get your attention, was this about this 19th century invention and how it's becoming so popular. It's popular, almost like in China, and I've been traveling around China these past few years. They're springing like new museums are like mushrooms after the rain, in Périgord. You keep finding new museums all the time, and so this is really something that I find fascinating. This is the Louvre by Hubert Robert in 1794, just at the time when the revolution in France turned this palace, this kingly palace, where the Henri IV was running into this little sledge, into a museum, a national museum, and I'll get back to this concept of national museums. At the time, just a minute on this image. At the time, the Louvre, before it turned into a museum, was an artist squat. That's an instance of the artist squat being turned into a museum, because obviously Louis the 14th had brought the court to Versailles. So the whole Louvre actually was in disrepair and was really a squat for artists. Now the Louvre has turned into that, and this was from last year, right? You've got Dark Vador meeting Hercules, and that's one of their most recent shows, and that's really what I find the mystery of those museums, wooing the millennials and Chinese millennials, and specifically. I really find I'd like to share a few insights, as a sort of the context of where we stand now, before getting quite a number of images that I'd like to share with you of future projects, museums that are just open or yet to open or will be open in the coming weeks and months. So this is pretty new stuff. Some of it is confidential still, but I want to share all those images with you. But first, as I said, so many new museums. That has to do, I believe, with the fact that museums today are the quintessential institution of our time, because they really cater to our the thirst for social networks. We all want to to do selfies, and those fluxes of images are really the blood of those social networks. And we post and repost images, not quotations of Shakespeare. That's why I believe now that while the 19th century has been building so many libraries, the quintessential institution of our time are image-based, are visual collections, are museums. And they respond also to the fact that globalization and the way we use it is really a way of, we've triumphed over the Babel curse, right? That punishment that we were all speaking different languages and could not communicate. And now, obviously, images are the language that we use. And you'd never go and visit a library, a national library in Brazil or in France, but you'd go to the museum there because this is something we can share. So I'll start with a very obvious explanation for that extraordinary museum madness, new museums opening up everywhere, and that is tourism. But I want to go during that presentation beyond this very obvious and very true explanation, because I think there are stronger and now motivations and explanations. But clearly, the rise of visual arts museums has been driven and fueled by the mass tourism, and this is something that you experience when you go to either India or China or Indonesia now or the Philippines. The rise of a middle class, and to belong to the middle class, you've got two criteria. One is leisure. You have the time. You have the leisure to travel and also to educate your kids. That's one of the key factors, and that's the tourism industry has been, I guess, rising again 6% in this first half of 2017. This is the fastest growing industry in the world, in spite of security concerns. And museums really have been fueled by this. The Louvre has been hiring recently the top engineers from the Charles de Gaulle Airport, people that are in charge of management, crowd management at Charles de Gaulle Airport, have been hired by the Louvre just to manage those crowds, right? And clearly, among those fastest growing regions, China and Asia is really a key center. Just so you know, in 10 years' time, 15 years' time at most, 2/3 of China, 60%, 2/3 of China will belong to the middle class. And we're talking about a country that is 6 times the US. And they all want to travel, and they all want to have access to that, common culture that they felt were not part of their life before. So they are coming, and at the Louvre, I mean, this is a clear instance. That's why they buy Vuitton, and that's why they come to the museums, right? So that is true also of the Middle East. Clearly, culture now is really much something that they want to have access to. But culture through the social networks, as I said, this is really about consuming images. And I wanted to show you this image of, this is MoMA. This is one of the masterpieces at MoMA. I'm sure you recognize Van Gogh's Starry Night. I just want to give you this as an example of how we and the millennials, together we now consume masterpieces in the museums. I was again at the MoMA very recently, and people in the Matisse room where they have the Moroccans and were all on their iPhones, right? And the younger ones playing games. So this is a new way of consuming the art. And I take these other images. Some of you may be familiar with the Broad, which is a great addition to the landscape of museums in the US. And the Broad has, from their own, they are very proud of saying that their visitors, on average, are 10 years younger, on average, than all other museums in the US, which is, very striking. And that they have a majority of visitors that are first-timers. And they do that by really, relying heavily on social networks, and also of including social networks in the way they present it. In this piece by Robert Terrien, is really, you have the docent really sort of showing, this is where you want to be for a good selfie. That's the best angle you can get. So they include that in the way they welcome the visitors. And just snapshots of new first-timers. I said they are really clearly, when you go to the Broad, you can sense that a majority of people are coming to the visitors for the first time, right? Just very briefly, this is the Brooklyn Museum, MoCA. All of them are really using this as an important tool. Now, this is the obvious, the obvious way we feel that newcomers, millennials, are enjoying the museum, are coming to museums in throngs. Now, we'd like to go a little beyond that, and I'll share with you my sort of I'm convinced that today, and I'll make it very simple. There are two types, let's say two types of museums. They either belong on the mall or in the mall, and that's the new. That's a new trend for many museums. On the mall, obviously, would be these ones. The mall in Washington, D.C., meaning those great museums that really say something of, they are part of the national discourse. They are tools, they contribute to a nation, the way a nation or city or region creates its storytelling, speaks of itself, defines its own identity. They really are spinning the story that that really create a common cultural identity. And clearly, this is one of the last very striking example, a museum built by David Adjaye, African-born architect that we'll find later on. But this is really how the Louvre itself started. We just saw the images. The Louvre is really about that. It's one of those museums that really tell the story of a nation. As French people, part of our identity was built in the Louvre, really. From the kings to Napoleon, was enriched, obviously, the Louvre quite a lot. So these museums are essential cultural institutions. And for many countries nowadays, young countries, this is what they expect to find when they build and create museums. So this is not, the idea that we have new museums because they will attract tourists is true, but it is only very partial. It's only part of the answer. See, the Louvre itself, and this is a new museum inside the museum. This is the Islamic art department at the Louvre with this sort of flying carpet inside that covers a whole courtyard. It's a brand new museum. This is really the same sort of motivation that we had in the museum by David Adjaye of the African American history and culture. The one thing also that I think is a very striking evolution that tells part of the story of why this 19th century invention is now very popular with the young generation, is that we have turned from this model, and this is the Metropolitan in New York, and you see that they have the pillars and they have stairs, so that you have to actually walk up the stairs to culture that is high up there, and this is very impressive. And this was also the model for the Tate. This is the Tate Britain, right? This is the Greek temple, and over there, very sacred, far away, not for everybody, mind you, is the art. And we've turned from this model of the temple museum, so to speak, to this, which is really the transparent museum. And this is the new branch of the Louvre, north of France, by Japanese architects, Sanaha. And they were the ones who did a number of new buildings, the Rolex Center in Lausanne. And clearly, this is very striking. The museum now it really is welcoming and wants to be as transparent as can be. This is an entirely new way of interacting with the visitors, right? And by the way, this is a striking. I mean, it's the Louvre. It's a reinvention of that same old museum, right? Voorlinden Museum was opened this year in really, it's like yesterday in the Netherlands. It's a private museum, same principle, right? Contemporary art. It was the project was run by the director of the Rijksmuseum Amsterdam. Open again. This is really the museums that have been opened this year. This is the most recent. This is the new addition to Chateau Lacoste, which is a private, wonderful private art collection. Bit like feels like Napa Valley, if you. And this is Renzo Piano actually creating this new space, exhibition space there. So. Just giving you through a few images like this, the sense that really we're talking about completely new ways of entering museums. This is the gallery, what we call the Thousand Gallery, the Pompidou, and you see the connection to the street, so that people actually walking in the street are really inside the museum. You can see the works, you can see people, events, and it really is a different feel than walking up the stairs to the Met, right? And clearly this is a whole new story. You'll forgive me if I get back to obviously the Pompidou, because this was a landmark moment, and I'll show you how nowadays it has it's sort of reinterpreted nowadays at the other end of the world. When it was created, the Pompidou bears the name of the president Pompidou, was in charge, was prime minister at the time of student riots in France in '68, right? And he comes to power and says, okay, we need an institution that will modernize French society, that will allow students like you to have access to what's most contemporary, most daring internationally, right? And that was his project, modernizing French society with a building that obviously looks like an oil factory right beside Notre Dame de Paris, right in the center of Paris. Very striking. Obviously, at the time, people were very critical of that choice. This is a political mandate. The idea was not to attract tourists, right? Nowadays, the Pompidou has its fair share of international tourists, 3.5 million, on par with Tate and MoMA. It was created for French society, to modernize French society and make sure those students were throwing rocks at the police, at a place where there would be a window to the outside world and what was modern. So now, this is exactly what's happening in Saudi Arabia today. What I'm showing you here is the King Abdulaziz Center. I'm not sure many of you have heard about it. It is probably the most costly and biggest cultural project now under construction. It's just finished construction. It's by architect Snohita. Snohita are the architects of the SF MoMA, that just opened last year. And this project came even before SF MoMA. So the idea, the whole concept of this museum here in the east of Saudi Arabia, mind you, this is 80,000 square meter. This is it's $1 billion project. And it's complete with an opera, with film theaters, with a library, and with a huge museum and exhibition galleries in a country where you do not have any theater, where there is not a single cinema in the whole of the kingdom, right? And this was launched by obviously the king, and after 9/11, they realized that obviously that they had a problem with part of their youngsters, of students in Saudi Arabia, because you know that a few of those in the planes on 9/11 were from Saudi Arabia. And that came as a shock for the ruling elites. Why would they? And they wanted, and that's very, very close to the project of the Centre Pompidou 20 years or 30 years before. They wanted a window on the world for the Saudi youngsters that would show them what's happening elsewhere, what is going on elsewhere in the world, and what is very current and contemporary in terms of creation, where they would have access to theaters, you know. And that is, the project is now finished. It's going through what they call soft opening. So it's open, and it's yet to be officially inaugurated. And we organized, when I was at the Pompidou, organized the very first contemporary art exhibition in Dhahran, in Saudi Arabia. First time you'd present contemporary art with this piece by Picasso. And we were just saying with Mark just before the speech that this is actually Pablo Picasso's birthday today. He was born today, 136 years ago, right? So, and that was the first time we brought Picasso to Saudi Arabia, and that was something they didn't know the people would react, because as you see, and that was the rocking chair, the painting that we brought in that show, in that exhibition. You're not supposed to show the human figure. That's a big, that's impossible. And so we brought the exhibition and this work in particular, and they were themselves quite unsure how the religious authorities would react to that, saying, no, you cannot do that. And so we have all the police, it's actually the police, the religious police coming to the exhibition, just prior to opening, and they ended up all taking selfies in front of the Picasso, because that was the first time, right? And we thought, okay, that's a good sign, that's a good omen. And actually right now here is Chinese artist Kai Shou Guang visiting the exhibition with the cuisine to the king, and and also those types of work. This is Kowalski, the Polish artist from with work from the 70s, and this is the type of exhibition space that they have. It's massive, right? So this is really a new evolution. Again, you see this clearly in going back to the Saudi Arabia. That $1 billion project is not about attracting tourists. It's about the millennials. It's about, because half of the population is less than 20 years old. It's about them, but it's not about tourism. It's about opening up, new avenues of understanding and creation for that. Another interesting example, and obviously we are now from what I call the museum on the mall, that is the place, the politically motivated institution, to the different types of model. China has a whole range of new initiatives. And clearly, in all those Chinese cities, you'll have major projects like this one. I'll tell you a few words about it, that are not for tourism, but that both respond to political motivation of showing, what we are, creating this narrative of identity that I mentioned, and also putting the city on the map, because this is, let me tell you, this is going to put Shenzhen, the city of Shenzhen, on the map of international museum. This is by Austrian architects Korp Himmelblau. It's huge. It's the museum that you see is quite impressive. It's 90. It's almost 1 million square feet. A 1 million square feet museum dedicated to contemporary visual arts. Again, it's always about visual arts and urban planning. Look at that. This is the entry hall, right? And I'm actually working right now on a curating project for them. So again, this is still confidential because this is not open, and we are working on the curating proposal for them. This is how it looks like from the outside in Shenzhen. Shenzhen is a city of now 12 million, but in a generation, it moved from a fishing village of 3,000, and in 25 years' time, came to 12 million. It is in the history of mankind the most rapidly developing city that has ever existed, right? And they are extremely proud of that. That's their story. That's the story they want to tell the world, right? And this museum, their request is that the curators there tell this story. So they created this huge envelope that, and I call it branding, city branding, because this will be clearly part of making sure that people know that, about Shenzhen as opposed to Guangzhou or Shanghai or Beijing. But what they want to, the story they want to tell here is the story of this city that's been the fastest growing city and in history. And that is very, very interesting. So we are working for them on sort of a creating proposal that would include mixing, as I said again, visual arts, very striking visual arts, the way that contemporary artists are responding to the issues of urban issues, to tell this story. This is Kingelez, a Congolese artist that was this summer on show at the Fondation Vuitton. This is an extraordinary project of a city that's being built by, how do you call them, the remote-controlled drones that you can activate inside the exhibition space to build the city. I'm showing you different types of museums. Clearly, the ones we're showing here, I told you they are, for each of those countries or cities, it is their museum on the mall. It is their Louvre, the place where they will, where the school children will learn about the identity of their place, of their community. And this is a very interesting instance. The way the branding issues, you want to show off your country or your city, and the story you're going to tell inside that beautiful big box of a museum, right? I mentioned those new countries. Azerbaijan is one of those, right? It's extremely new. It was born out of, right after USSR disappeared. And the first thing they did was they commissioned Zaha Hadid to create this, and named after their first president, Aida Aliyev. So that's really, again, we want to exist. We have and bring people and be attractive to the world, but it's not so much about dragging all the tourists of the world as also telling our own constituents who we are, right? And again, I mean, when you drive through the streets of Baku, Azerbaijan, and you find this is quite it's arguably Zaha Hadid's most compelling, most striking, extraordinary building, right? And the French, we did a grand exhibition for them. So you see our issues of soft power combined there with creating those great exhibitions. That's another project, again, interesting. Baku, Shenzhen, now Malaga. We are moving away from the storytelling of a political, to city branding. There are the two impulses really at work in those new projects. And here with this beautiful piece by Danielle Baron. I don't know if you're familiar with Danielle Baron, the Grand Old Master of French conceptual art. On Malaga, I first met with the mayor of Malaga, and he wanted to have a new museum, bring the brand of the Pompidou to his city. And here it clearly was, the issue was to put Malaga on the map, to steal the show away from Sevilla, because Sevilla was the southern capital of Spain and had the world exhibition, and created, through a museum, also attract tourism. So this all converge here in this project, and for which the Pompidou has been lending quite heavily. And this is a transition for, I think, one of the most daring and extraordinary museum projects of our time. And this is the Louvre Abu Dhabi. And that's an interesting one. I was involved when I was at the Pompidou. I was in charge of all international projects. And the Pompidou was part of this consortium of French museums that are actually behind the Louvre Abu Dhabi. The Louvre sold its brand for a rather sizable amount. And beyond the brand itself, the whole building, the whole museum, the collections are being put together by a team of French museums. And that's interesting in that it really is probably the most ambitious museum project nowadays. It will open officially in 3 weeks from now, from November 7 to 11. November 7 to 11. So the building itself, what you see here is an artist rendering. This is an artist rendering. The museum is underneath a huge cupola, right? And this is what it looks like today, right? They are putting the last touches to this cupola. So I think it's about to be, I think, a very, very striking institution. I don't want to give you, numbers let's say it's a mix of the political narrative. There is a political, clearly a political impulse there, because you don't build that, and to assert Abu Dhabi, again a new country among the Gulf states, as opposed to Qatar, as opposed to Saudi Arabia, say we exist, and tourism is also only part of the story here. And what is interesting is when the British discovered that France had signed this is an agreement that was signed between the two countries. This is not a museum-to-museum sort of this was signed by the heads of states. And the British were sort of flabbergasted because they thought, Abu Dhabi, that's part of our, this is a kingdom, right? And this is part of our universe. And it really was something completely new to have this sort of, this is diplomacy at work, really. The tourism that it's going to be driving, because that's part, and I said only part of the story, is less with the Arab world. With this museum is really within 3 hours of Bombay. So and this is a new, clearly a new geography that we have to keep in mind. this huge museum is going to be less the Museum of the Arab World than the attraction to the Indian continent. And they are looking at those 2 billion people that are living within 3 hours of them, right? And this is really, think New York going to Miami. You go there on vacation and you'll have the sea and you'll have the Louvre, right? That's really, so, and there is only one flight from Abu Dhabi to Cairo every day. So it cannot be, the Egyptians or the Arab world coming to them. That's an interesting new way of looking at the geography. There was very recent shot of the Louvre Abu Dhabi. What is an important part of the museum has been the collection, and that was one of the challenges of this project was building a collection, because one thing is to have a contemporary art museum, and you go on the market and you see the Larry Gagosians of the world, and that you can do collection. Here it was really the idea of having a universal collection with masterpieces from all different periods of time, and the French curators were advising the Abu Dhabi on what to buy and when, at the expense of our own museums, because this Mondrian from 22 or 3 was in the collection of Yves Saint Laurent in Paris, sitting on Rue Bonaparte, right? And at the great Saint Laurent sale, it was bought by Abu Dhabi. Just going through very briefly, the great they've been the first acquisition of contemporary art from a Chinese artist, Yan Peiming. They have acquired also a major Twombly already, moving into the turf of what is expected to be the Guggenheim over there. And clearly the Guggenheim in Abu Dhabi is somehow on the back burner now. And this is Laurence Descartes. She's just been appointed president of the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, right? After serving the Louvre Abu Dhabi, the lead chief curator of the Louvre Abu Dhabi. So that's going to be a very interesting experiment. Going briefly, because that's so much is happening in the Gulf, in Qatar. This is the first museum, operational museum in the Gulf. That was the Museum of Islamic Art by Pei, right on the sea in Qatar. Again, that's another political strategy of branding a nation as being modern. We are being modern, so we open museums. Part of it is also to attract, the tourism. Interestingly, the quality of the collection in Qatar is amazing. This is much better than what you'd find at the Louvre for Islamic art. And frankly, I've checked the Met collection of Islamic art. What they are showing in Qatar, the way they are showing it in terms of museography, this is Jean-Marie Villemotte, is astounding. They're really like top-notch. So we cannot go there with a little sort of a assurance that this is much better than you'll find at the Louvre. Believe me. And they've been building museums upon museums. This is the new national museums. Again, it's all about the storytelling. This is the mall. This is Qatar. This is the museum on the mall in Qatar. This is the Corniche where everyone is driving past. And this is their national museum by Jean Nouvel. In the way they brand themselves nowadays, contemporary art is a key element. With big art commissions like this, and Richard Serra, obviously, on the water or in the desert. And if you ever go, this is mind-boggling. This is a huge installation on several miles by Richard Serra in the middle of nowhere in the desert, right? With giant slabs of steel over there. This is really less for tourism. You don't find any tourists there than saying to the world, we're a modern, contemporary country. This is who we are. Just giving you a hint of this, This is very striking. This is the entrance hall to their contemporary art museum. It's called Mataf. It's in an ancient school that's been retrofitted, and this is by French-born Adel Abdesemed. He's Algerian-born. He's now with David Zwirner in New York, and this is a bomb, a huge replica of a bomb in the entrance hall to the museum. Very shocking project. Some of his images. Again, there are opening museums everywhere. This is the old fire station where they had this year a Picasso Giacometti retrospective that you see here. So very aggressively promoting themselves as a modern and destination. Again, this is not only about tourism, and this is the next step in this incredible creation, multiplication of museums over there. They are building, let me tell you, a very, very first-class modern art collection that they'll show here on the harbor. They just awarded the project to a Pritzker Prize of last year, Alejandro Aravena from Chile. Now, just moving briefly, and I'll conclude with an overview of what's going on in China. And it's slightly different. As I said, museums are either on the mall, and we've seen a number of instances of museums that are, formal, very official institutions that tell the story, a national or local story. In China, you have that, but you can get into business and retail are driving forces of museums. Here, this is a paper from the New York Times that was looking at this arts explosion in Shanghai. And you have the Long Museum, very beautiful museum. That's the power station of art that we opened with an exhibition from the Pompidou 5 years ago. This is in one stretch of Shanghai. All these museums that I'm showing you are on a 3-mile stretch of Shanghai along the river that's being redeveloped. That's their own turbine hall with Wang Yongping exhibition. Is the one artist that was pulled up from the Guggenheim show last week. If you remember the big story of the Guggenheim show scandal, that was him, with huge pieces that was the show we did along that same river at the Hughes Museum. They converted the airport there into this museum. Just giving you a few images. These museums are very striking. You'd think they are, that Shanghai is turning itself into a new contemporary arts capital. The truth is, all those new projects in China that I'm showing you here are about urban development, and when you say that, this is privately driven. This is real estate projects. So that this museum now is really for rent. And that's, the model here is slightly different. Big urban project, land development, you need to have a museum. That's added value to the project. The idea is that they'll need to sell thousands and thousands of flats to this new middle class. And what is going to give them added value to their land development is the presence of a visible museum. That's part of the deal, parts of the package they need. And that's what comes with these real estate projects. The truth is, and another interesting insight here is that visitors, the public, the millennials in China, if you will, are much more into James Turrell and Olafur Eliasson than even Picasso or Giacometti. And they had the most prestigious Giacometti exhibition with the Walking Man, the great icons of modern sculpture. Yes, there were a few people visiting, but the great success in terms of numbers, where James Turrell was a phenomenon in Shanghai. because it's very, it's selfie-friendly in a way, right? That's the Long Museum by the river. It's completely being redeveloped here. And they created even this new gallery district on the West Bund. So it's all integrated, right? And this did not exist last year. This did not exist. The gallery, sort of the gallery quarter in Shanghai was called Morganshan inside the city. And they took it all the way from and put it there. So this is 1 year old. And all the great galleries, like international galleries, are over there now. This is the type of shows that you get now in the east of Shanghai. But as I said, those museums now, they've been part of this redevelopment, great real estate deals. But 2 years afterwards, like this one, after 2 or 3 or 4 years, programming starts, disintegrating. It's the danger is that they turn up, as big empty boxes, the white elephants of culture. That's the. Going very briefly, that's a good instance of what I was describing. This is North Hong Kong. We're discussing Hong Kong with Mark over there just prior to the show. This is north of Hong Kong. This is exactly what I'm describing. This is a property development. Thousands of very trendy flats for the new rich, new money in Hong Kong. And part of the development is is a small, not so small actually, contemporary art museum where you get your John Baldessari, when you drive home in the evening, right? And David Hatchmed from the great retrospective. So this is, instead of having your little grocery store at the entrance of the residential towers, you have your little contemporary art museum, right? And there is one project that is combining all of these, and that's the one I was working on. It really brings together all of what I've been describing and the idea that the museum can be also added value for more. That this is the K11 in Shanghai. The owner of the K11 in Shanghai, Mr. Adrian Cheng, is a young avid art collector. He's opening 14 huge luxury retail malls all around China. And in each of these retail malls, you'll find this. A sexy contemporary art museum that, with programs of exhibitions. Stuart Hu is actually in the collection of the Whitney, and that was a show that they had last year. And that's an interesting phenomenon, and I'll end my presentation with this. The fact that now the new museums that are being built are driven by the mall. Obviously, the malls are going through a terrible crisis all around the place, and to reinvent themselves, they need something that to offer something that you cannot buy on Amazon, right? Otherwise, people will never anymore drive their car. They're not driving their car to the mall. So the museum is the answer to that they are finding, and inserting a museum in the mall, making sure that people will find there an experience that cannot be duplicated on the internet is what they are looking for. By the way, New York Times story, what you're looking at is David Adjaye Mall and Museum in Beirut. The IHT Foundation was opened last year, and this is the mall, and this is the museum. And David Adjaye obviously is the one who built the Museum of African American History and Culture. So he opened these two museums last year. One is this mall, and the other is the one on the mall. The one project I've been working on for the past 2 years in Hong Kong is this one, is a museum on top of a mall. And it brings everything together, right? You have a big hotel, you have office space, luxury retail, all of it, and inside of it, to make sure that people will visit and spend time and money in here, you have this museum, right? The views of the Hong Kong skyline, and we really wanted to offer that as really a draw for the visitors. What is really striking in here is that in that type of museum, they are integrating technologies from the security industry. This is science fiction, really, already. In that museum, they are installing facial recognition cameras so that they know exactly who you are the moment you step foot inside a museum. And thermal imagery, the thing they have on the drones and look at, is also in the museums, because then you can tell where the people spend more time, because it reflects on the ground. So this is part of this extraordinary sort of new developments in terms of museums and this museum now, in terms of visitors, and I'll end up with these numbers. This is giving you just a few shots of how it would look like. We are installing the same wooden floor that they have at the Whitney, beautiful wooden floor with the view, obviously. Whitney was kind of a good model for us, the new one by Renzo Piano, because you've got the sea, you've got the skyline, and in terms of visitors, the mall, that is, it sits on a mall, is attracting 4 million visitors a month. So the calculus for us, we are on the 6th floor. Let's say we have only 10%, 1 out of 10 will come to our door. And we are bigger than Tate already, because you've got 400,000 people through the doors every month simply because you're on top of the mall. That's part of the incredible demographics of this model here that's being engineered. And this is the perhaps, I don't know if it's the museum of the future, but in China that's an interesting development. And again, obviously, part of the negotiations for the mall is to say, look, it's not only for the visitors, attracting the visitors, but attracting the brands, telling the Vuittons and the Armanis and the, look, you'd better be in that new mall because we are giving you this on top of everything else, right? It's part of again, another type of branding, if you will. Right, perhaps I should stop here. I've been talking too much, too long, too fast. And see if you would like to have a few comments or exchanges on this.
Thank you so much. I have so many questions, but I will limit myself to just one to begin.
Okay.
I guess I want to start by asking. First, thank you for that talk. That's so broad. When you're talking about branding a city, branding a country, putting it on a global map, putting it in a global conversation, how do you think about that sort of individuation when you're meeting all the same architects and showing all the same artists? And generally, I mean, everyone's got a Richard Serra everywhere, right?
Yes.
Gogh has done everything.
And they want their own.
Right.
They certainly want their own.
So as you're branding your country and you're branding your museum, you're using some architects that are also brands, right?
Mm-hmm.
Zaha Hadid looks like Zaha Hadid, looks like Zaha Hadid, right?
Yeah.
Do the artworks themselves also begin to function like brands?
Of course.
Begin to function like brands?
Absolutely.
And as such, are we still thinking of museums in the humanist model where they're like moral educators? Like, what then does the art do?
It entertains in a way. In this model that you're describing, that we are we've seen a few shots. The idea when we say the brand, they want to belong. They are a new country. There is, or let's say Shenzhen as wants to be on the map in the conversation, as you say, as opposed to and in rivalry with Guangzhou and Hong Kong and Shanghai. It really wants to belong, and that's the same for Baku. And how do you belong? Because you get this, the architects that you've seen elsewhere, and it makes you part of the the international community in a way. So there is an obvious discrepancy, and I tried again and again to hammer about this. One thing is to create those big envelopes that are branded as the Jean Nouvel or the Hadid, sort of a box with the inevitable Richard Serra. And Richard Serra is actually very good. I mean, you could find much worse in those. But another issue is the storytelling that they create for their own community, for their own country there, right? So those are the two impulses that I've tried to really mark out. They want to exist in the world, and you'll be on the map not because you have an unknown local architect who's built something that no one knows about, that is not going to grab you the New York Times attention, and you cannot have your press release, and that's why you want the brand names, right? And the Giacometti coming to Qatar was part of that. Another thing is to create a museum where you'll have all the school children of your city learning about the incredible growth of this, the Shenzhen miracle story of how we came from 3,000 to 12 billion from the time your daddy was in school. That's what they want to, the story they are asking us to tell in this huge Koppenblau shiny box, right? But they need both, because you don't finance the big, museum if you don't have those kinds of names and brands and and belong to that part of to that international sort of a story. And those two impulses are sometimes difficult to reconcile. Yeah.
When I was paying attention, it seemed like there was a theme of like secondary world and third world countries trying to elevate themselves and create, promote themselves as like a modern country, kind of how like China did during the Beijing Olympics. I don't know much about the impact of museums. Why do you think they chose museums to focus on instead of like other buildings that have significance? Like it's odd to me, but I mean I would love to learn more.
Yeah, I never mentioned third world. I mean, this is, yeah, it's absolutely, they were, okay, in a way, this is part of the mix of motivations that they have. A museum, and I started with saying a museum as opposed to a library or a big, let's say after the Olympics, your Olympic swimming pool. You'll never have people visiting your swimming pool, right? Or whereas a museum visual arts will draw people again and again and again because you have a program of exhibitions, because visual arts is the universal language of our time, because you don't have any language barrier with visual arts because they are brands that are international brands, and because also people can have their selfie and that's part of, and beyond the social networks. That's what makes museums as an institution today very, very social network friendly. Very. And part of this is being attractive to visitors, either local visitors or millennials, the young ones, or foreign visitors, right? That's why the museum has the edge as an institution. And it has the cultural sort of a cultural and educational front, and at the same time can be very entertaining. So, which is a much more difficult balance or difficult act when you're a library. It's difficult to be completely entertaining, when you're a library, because people are supposed to be silent and alone, and speak the language, right? So. I understand this is turning into a night event, right? I'm sorry about that.
I just was wondering, do you think this, like the mall as a cultural institution with this museum and the mall as is a sort of thing that would work within the United States to revitalize malls here? Or do you know of any projects that are currently happening in the United States or reflect these trends happening in Hong Kong?
It's happening it's happening all over the place in China to drive people to the mall. It's the one example I gave you. The IHT Foundation is in Beirut, right? This one. I mean, it's and this one I passed very briefly is north of Paris. This is the largest project. I'm not saying cultural. It's the largest building project in France right now. It's called Europa City. It's by, again, you'll say always the same name, but you know that's how you finance a big project like this, by Snohita. And this is the project is financed by the Auchan group. Auchan is the French Walmart, if you will, right? This is the number one. Walmart. And inside of that, they are creating their biggest ever. They're working on their biggest ever mall, but they wanted to reinvent the mall because, like everywhere else, people are not going to drive to our doorstep anymore, and Amazon is getting all the traffic. So they include in that project a museum, a huge exhibition, art exhibition space, and they're working with the Réunion des Musées Nationaux to program that space. So you'll have the big Gogh exhibition and the big, Picasso, Marie-Thérèse show over there. And they are slated to open for the Olympics, actually, 2024. That's it. So I'm surprised it's not happening here.
Is the length of these shows longer or shorter in this new model?
For the moment, those are projects in China. It's much shorter. We're talking about shows that can be 6 weeks, maximum 2 months. I mean, there is something of a turnover, right? Okay, and then it gets a little. They are probably not going to be in the circuit, what we call the circuit of museums, the sort of the Bizot group kind of museums. Although MoMA is actually traveling 200 of its masterpieces, not to the Pompidou right now, but to the Vuitton Foundation in Paris. And that's an interesting evolution. MoMA and Pompidou were like, I lend you the big Miro triptych, and can I get your Malevich for my upcoming shows? And the new, what is very striking is that that MoMA is partly closed for his next big building, and they are traveling the 200 of their collection, not to the Pompidou. We are putting this because for obvious reasons of financial reasons, but it's in the Vuitton building in Paris, and that says something of the future of big art museums. Model is changing very rapidly. So how are they going to work in those Chinese malls? The mall museum gives exposure to artists, so that if the owner is also a collector and buys in bulk young artists, and then you get to show them right after that in a mall that has 4 million foot traffic every month, then your artist gets seen a lot, and you have a good PR and good communication team. Then the artists have, suddenly they have had 1, 2, 3 shows all around your museums, mall museums, and then your initial investment in the artwork that you put in your museum has gone up. I mean, this is the Chinese way of doing business as well. I mean, the model is.
Do you think it's respectful to put art in a mall where some people might consider art to be sacred, and in a mall people are buying material goods and it can be considered worldly? So is it respectful to place wonderful, beautiful images in a place that isn't always considered that way.
I mean, that's an extremely valid concern. They will answer you that, for instance, in China, they want to put the art where people are coming, the public sphere, the public place, and that is very true, is the shopping mall. That's very true also in the Gulf. You have, the one public space where people go and will interact is the mall, is the shopping mall. So if you want to give artists exposure and allow people to come, face to face with the art, instead of, building your box outside and waiting for people to one day decide that they come to visit you, you bring the art to where they are coming day after day after day. You see? And that's the argument. They say, well, in this mall, I've got 4 million foot traffic a month. No museum in the world ever has that, okay? They'll come and see the art. And an interesting movement in that sense is airports. Big international airports are opening, let's say, not museums per se, but art exhibition galleries. That's true of Roissy-Charles de Gaulle. Schiphol International Airport in Amsterdam has a beautifully done little exhibition space, and they curate actually art shows. I've seen, decent little art exhibitions on Dubuffet, I almost got killed once because one of those projectors was falling. But no, they are no, really in the airport. But they are curating shows in the airports now with the same rationale and airports are malls, really. I mean, duty-free malls, right? But that's where people will get face to face. And even in France, after 50 years of cultural democracy and making sure that we wanted to bring people to the art, it's, who comes to the museums. Those who want, those who know, those who are educated, So they are, that's a good point they are making in a way. I'm not saying, I want to see my Kandinsky's, at Walmart, but, right,
So yeah, I got 2 quick questions. On one of your slides you mentioned that there were 2 basic models of museum that are evolving in this movement. I guess one that you mentioned was the model of museum on the mall. And then from what I'm understanding, there are actually 2 other ones. One of them is domestic reconstruction. The other one is these centers of these beacons that are showing this is the standard of what we believe is a culture, and it's very central. So I'm just curious to know why you mentioned that there were 2 basic types and how you're grouping those different. Yeah,
I obviously wanted to catch your attention with the idea of, either you are on the mall, meaning this is an institution that is an official institution that will fabricate, if you will, a story, a national story, or just, that people will feel they are part of this community. Azerbaijan, Azerbaijan was not a country. You could not feel, you belong to Azerbaijan because it did not exist. So the moment you become a country, it is striking that the first, and look at the investment, right? That for such a small country that they made was create a huge museum with a big brand name, architecture, because this is the place where people can feel they belong to a community. That's, Azerbaijan. Same for Shenzhen. You feel they belong to this metropolis, right? So clearly there is this discourse for the constituents, right? And I didn't mean that there are only two types of museums. There is an infinite number of, I mean, university museums are extraordinary places of education. No, but this is one important model, and the other model is not. It's the same. Many of those have those two impulses. They are, competing impulses, but they speak to their constituents. They want to speak to their constituents, create a discourse for them, and at the same time, they want to be on the map internationally, gather, attract, visitors, or simply this makes them attractive. Think of Singapore and Hong Kong. I was talking about, large Chinese metropolis, but Singapore has opened last year a huge national gallery of art of Singapore in the Supreme Court. They transformed the Supreme Court. Think of that. They transformed the Supreme Court into a national art gallery, contemporary art, same artist that you'd find ever, and Hong Kong has been investing for the past 10 years into their M+, their Museum of Visual Culture, modern and contemporary visual culture, because they need that to be attractive as business hub, simply to have the not only tourists but businesses come and settle there. So those are different impulses. They can be in the same actually institution. Some of those museums will serve both purposes. You want the big shiny box and attract and be on the map and make sure you have a feature article in the international press and etc. And at the same time, you're a place that will create a discourse and make sure that people feel they belong to this either city or or Abu Dhabi or Qatar. Qatar is fascinating. Probably 4 of the most expensive museum projects are being built in this country, and there are, let's say, at most 100,000 Qataris, nationals. It's like a city like Angers in France. It's tiny, but they need to exist as a country, and they do that either with sports, World Cup, and culture museums. Yes.
So a lot of the focus seems to be on, part of why museums are being included with malls is because they're both the kinds of things that people want to go and experience personally. As cameras get better, we have like 360-degree cameras now, and I can look on my phone and in virtual reality. Do you ever see the day where where virtual art galleries are a strong competitor to physical art galleries like this?
Oh, that's an interesting question. They do exist already. The Google Art Project for instance, at the Prado. The Prado has already created super high definition images of his masterpieces. Like the Jérôme Bosch at the Prado, you can actually, you'll see it much better on your screen than when you go in the crowd, and actually you cannot, you want to be, so very close, much better on your screen. But, and that is either the beauty or the sacred dimension of the art, you'll still want to go see Mona Lisa, and it's a terrible experience, but you'll still want. No, I show you Starry Night at the MoMA, right? That was my first slide. There is a huge crowd and people are, and they are, but you still want to be physically in the presence of Van Gogh or the Mona Lisa. And Mona Lisa, you'll find very, very good reproductions on, everywhere. So that's why museums are such nowadays. Visual arts museums. This extraordinary institution of our time, because they are they are social media, internet friendly, so because they are image based and they fuel our, those social media and thirst and glut of images, and at the same time, you cannot Amazon them away, right? No way. And next time you're in Paris, go and see everyone that is coming to the Louvre and doing the trek all the way to the Mona Lisa has seen the Mona Lisa thousands of times. Of course, I mean, it's part of our, but you want to this minute of presence. It's sacred. It's about, yeah. And we're not going to be out of, job anytime soon. I don't think so.
No, but a lot of museums aren't able to compete with the cost of securing or even lending contemporary art, real contemporary art.
Yeah, that's the issue.
It's a have and have not. Very.
Yeah.
It's very elitist to be able to stage a collection like that.
The cost of security are big now. An extreme impediment to.
So,
oh yeah.
Question back here. Donald Judd, the minimalist sculptor who created his own little art compound in Market Texas because he felt like museums weren't generally respectful to artworks, and so he wanted to create his own context for work that he felt was a bit more respectful to that. And he even referred to MoMA as this modern fascist architecture and was not necessarily friendly to artwork. So the question I have along those lines deals primarily with institutions in China and Saudi Arabia, and that how might you respond to thoughts or criticisms that these museums are basically just kind of propaganda arms of somewhat fascist governments, so instead of necessarily helping the people in the countries and through legislation and policy, instead they kind of use the museums as a way to launder their identities and use the artwork and brands of the artworks to kind of launder their identities.
And that is a very legitimate, very, very legitimate question. I've seen this summer, instances of censorship in Chinese museum, contemporary art. French artist whose work was on opening day of the exhibition, literally half of the images in the work were taken out. Boom! It's very brutal. And it's how can you do that? I mean, of course. I mean, this is the way it. But in the case of Saudi Arabia, for instance, there is a clear, absolute drive by the authorities to open this, to give this platform, this window to the world, to the society, to the youth in Saudi Arabia. And the fact that they are coming to the Pompidou, I remember having the top level team from Saudi Arabia coming to the Pompidou to discuss the agreement and a partnership. And we were having at the time the exhibition of the women artists of the collection, extremely feminist, extremely polemical. And the first room in that exhibition was called Genital Panic, with the kind of feminist art pieces from the 60s and 70s that you'd expect to find there. And I was like, oh my God, the Saudi delegation is coming. It's gonna be a shock after that. And they were extremely interested, and they wanted us, Pompidou, with that type of history and to be their partner. So there is really this drive. And then, another, and this is something that we've all experienced, I'm sure, recently, I was posting a photo of an exhibition, a recent photo exhibition at the Pompidou of a Dutch photograph, Elena Brothers, that was on show at the Pompidou. It was a very good mid-career photograph on my Facebook. And Facebook answered and saying, we deleted your photo because it does not respect the criteria of our, So, and I experienced this as, this is a museum photograph. It was curated by a colleague, and they took it out of my Facebook like this. So, I mean, this is also censorship in a way. But this is a bit of an abrupt end. Yeah, please. I'm good if you're good. You're the boss.
Do you want to ask one last question?
Yeah, sure. I want to ask, so a lot of the names of the countries that we're talking about commissioning these museums are a lot of the same countries that we see when we're looking at university campuses abroad. The push to have a University of Utah in Seoul, VCU, Qatar, right? Is there any relationship in your mind between the university brand extension?
Oh yeah, there's been a game in the Gulf. I mean, the Sorbonne was being approached, and of course that's part of the attractiveness. And also in terms of university, they realized that they lacked a number of skills in their workforce, and creating higher education, was a way of answering that need for some skills in the museum industry, as in many other realms. So that's part of the answer.
Thank you so much.